So up till now, everything that we've usually talked about has been part of the land development construction stage, such as the rough grading, the wet utilities, dry, street improvements, and so on, all the way to the flat work and the landscaping. However, if we take a step back and we want to go to the beginning, there's actually two big steps before the land development construction process, and that's the feasibility analysis and the entitlement stage. So let's talk about what the feasibility analysis is. Now, during the feasibility analysis, this is typically the stage where you first determine if you can even turn a profit. You're also going to research, is there a demand for your building product in this particular area? Other things you want to research is the growth in the area, zoning, timing, source of jobs, nearby amenities such as libraries, good schools, transportation. Is there close access to major highways and things like that? Now, when I say timing, I am referring to the real estate market. However, I say that with a grain of salt because obviously it is impossible to actually predict the real estate market. However, you do have to be aware of the patterns in the real estate market and that it ebbs and flows. So if you're in a market where currently it's really good and you're looking to buy land, you have to project and think, is it going to still be good in possibly another 2, maybe 3 years when you're actually ready to start selling your homes? And that's something you have to take into account. Sometimes you may have to start looking to buy property when things are really slow and it may not be doing good. And maybe you'll project that by the time you're ready to start selling in I don't know, a couple years, that the market will pick back up and you'll be right at the peak. So you have to take that into account. Okay, so now that you've completed your feasibility analysis and everything looks good, you're now ready to make an offer to the seller. And at this point, this is where developers and builders will do what you call that quick and dirty or back of the napkin or back of the envelope offer. Because this number is typically based upon developers' past experience and assumptions as far as costs go in order to build. Because one thing you have to remember is that it's impossible to know every cost associated with this particular site before making an offer. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't do your due diligence, because you absolutely should, but it's all about the timing. What I mean by that is that if you spend too much time investigating every little thing and nook and cranny about the property before you even tie it up, then you'll take too long and someone else will come in and tie it up before you do, and then you'll lose it. And you will have wasted a ton of your resources, such as your time, energy, and money. So that was the feasibility analysis. Now we're going to move on to the entitlement stage. And assuming that we made an offer and that we got it tied up, it's now tied up, and now we can perform a more thorough investigation on the property in this stage here. Now, the entitlement stage is pretty complex and in-depth, so just keep in mind land development is not for the faint-hearted. There's some projects where the project gets held up in entitlement stage alone for years at a time. I mean, it's not uncommon for people to be sitting on property that they bought 20, 30 years ago, and they're still trying to get things worked out with the county or with the city. You have to keep that in mind. Entitlements is a pretty grueling and lengthy process. In my personal experience, I know that there's big home builders. They're not afraid of land development, but they won't touch complete raw property if there's no entitlements. Now, part 1 of the entitlement stage, there's 2 things you absolutely need when getting started. It's your environmental site assessment, or your ESA, phase 1, and your prelim soils report. And as you progress a little further, we'll call it part 2, you're going to get your ESA phase 2, biological survey report, your environmental impact report, or EIR, and your archaeological study, and an acoustic study. All right, now let's dive in and briefly touch up on each of these. Your ESA, or environmental site assessment, phase 1, looks for any potential contamination by hazardous materials within the soil or groundwater beneath, which may be harmful to people or the environment. The phase 1 of this report mainly consists of site inspections, review of records, interviews with owners, previous owners, neighbors, etc. Next up is the prelim soils report. Now, you've heard me mention the soils report multiple times in all my past videos and posts, because again, your soils report is hugely important, and it becomes a Bible for your project and instructions for you and all your subcontractors. It's a very thorough investigation and testing of the soils that exist on your project site. This report will also include recommendations for grading, building structural types, and foundation systems. This is necessary in order for the civil engineers to prepare site grading plans, and it gives subcontractors an idea of what they will be dealing with when excavating and doing their work, which is very important when you're also getting cost estimates from your subcontractors. If you need accurate numbers from your subcontractors for costs, they must have the soils report. Your phase 2 of the ESA will now consist of laboratory testing of samples taken from the actual site. So this is done to confirm the presence or not of hazardous material and the levels of the samples. Your biological survey report deals with sensitive plants and endangered species. Just some examples to name a few include burrowing owls, Mojave ground squirrels, desert tortoises, gnat catchers, yellow-legged frogs, and believe it or not, a presence of a tiny little critter on your site can halt your project immediately and put your schedule back. And I've also seen some builders having to drop a ton of money just to build a huge sound wall barrier because a special bird was found nearby and it was during its special nesting season. Also, too, you want to be careful. If your site naturally stores water and creates ponds after it rains, it could become a natural wetland for new critters and other wildlife, which means more jurisdictional red tape to jump through. Your land just may become a new home to any endangered species and they will get priority. Your EIR, or the Environmental Impact Report, will discuss the effects your project may have on the environment. Such effects include air quality, gas emissions, water quality, noise, population, energy, aesthetics, biological resources, etc., and the list goes on. An archaeological report will be required if your site is located within an area of cultural sensitivity, or in other words, if your site has the potential to contain archaeological resources. This assessment will determine the level of cultural heritage value of any archaeological resources found within the site. For instance, there's a lot of areas around here in Southern California that have some sort of connections or ties with Native American Indian tribes. Now, you'll have to be sensitive to that, and there's probably going to be a couple other, some extra precautions that you're going to have to take. You're probably going to have some restrictions as well. For instance, you may not be able to use reclaimed water on your site and other things like that. So again, you'll have to be sensitive to that. An acoustic study will estimate noise and vibration that the project would generate. As the study uncovers any potential issues, it will have recommendations such as site orientation, design modifications, building materials, barriers, berms, etc. You're also going to be dealing with your engineer and getting a tentative track map and eventually a final map. So again, you'll be doing that simultaneously.